All right, so we're going to move on to the last session before we move on to the workshops. I'd like to invite Jillian, Manus on stage. So basically, we decided to end with the Silicon Valley session because we wanted you guys to hear about China, Africa, India, and then we really wanted to tie things together at the end with Jillian's perspective on, all right, so you've heard everyone speak from all these other markets. What are they thinking over there in the West? So let's get into it then.
Am I on?
Yeah,
oh my God,
on.
That's a rhetorical question.
All right, so I guess I'll take Tamer's also kind of approach. If you have a question, just go up to a mic and we'll address it as well, kind of live. But maybe we'll start a bit more about StructureCapital in Silicon Valley. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about that because you're very different in your approach.
Yeah.
And you do have kind of your tagline is, you know, we're the architects of the zero waste economy. So the approach that you're taking is kind of very specific. And I'm also curious to know if you feel like that applies to companies outside of the US.
It does. So, you know, interestingly enough, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me because I've met some of the most fascinating perspectives that I think we all need to do more of. We all need to listen, open up our ears, and really better understand the global dynamics, not on just the geopolitical level, but really down to the more granular level, which is how can we create, instead of harming each other, our countries, how can we heal each other? How can we create more bridges of trust through business? And I think that as our governments are squabbling and governments do that, it's really up to us. It is up to the people of these countries to pull ourselves together and to invest in each other, to innovate with each other. And so I give kudos to China, I give kudos to Africa and India. I think the US could do a better job, to tell you the truth. I'm not even gonna go there why we're not right now. But you know, if we're gonna take a long lens, post everything, perhaps maybe we can actually start to create a higher integrity and elevate society. There is something called the 21st century business model. And basically what it is not just now returning to shareholders. It is not just providing a return to shareholders, but in fact, it is providing a return to society. And that's what the 21st century business model is. And so that is sort of where we are sitting. We are StructureCapital, we're an early stage fund. We're actually now raising a growth fund. That's one of the reasons I'm here, to kind of better understand and sort of create partnerships. And Pule hit it right on the nose, which is, when we think of the composition of our funds, it's very easy for me to scoop up money in the US. But in order to gain partnerships and be able to expand our companies into these markets, whether it be Africa, India, China, it is critical for us to have boots on the ground and to have minds and to understand and help us navigate through cultures and regulatory landscapes. But back to what we do, we call ourselves architects of the zero waste economy, because the way we look at it is we think of waste, whether it's wasted space. We were the third investor in Uber. Okay, so we think of wasted transportation, we think of wasted space, how to take real estate, how to take space and redefine it into co-working spaces, into different types of reimagining space. We look at wastewater, how to decrease wastewater with liquid impregnated barriers, creating by an algorithm that changed the molecular structure of high viscosity liquids out of MIT. So we look at different, but the most important waste that we all need to look at is wasted human potential. And that for us is exactly where I'm looking. The proverb, Maimonides has a great proverb, and it says that instead of giving people fish, you give them a pole, a fishing pole. Well, how is it that we can all create paths of self-sufficiency for our own populations and each other's? And so that is really the end goal that we look for. We look at waste and how to do better with what we already have. But we also look for one other particular mantra that we have, which is we invest in values, not just valuations. in a world where it's so deficit of integrity right now, we really believe that it is critical for the companies that we are investing in right now to have values. And where there are values in the foundation of companies, so there are success. We see it over and over again. It is rarely a product fails. It is usually the leadership. It is usually a human that fails in a company. And so when we actually do investment assessments, one of the things we ask our founders is, of course, we ask about traction and product market fit. We all ask about burn, and we ask about, obviously, the technology behind it and IP protection and defensibility and all those. But we also ask them, what are your values? How did you identify them? How are you applying them? Every single one of our companies, and some of our companies are doing 80 million, some of our companies are doing 250 million ARR. And we ask every single one, and we work with them and train them into taking their values and actually engaging it and implementing it into the fiber of their culture. This is something that Airbnb is doing right now. It's called the Intentional Integrity Program. And if you look at the 21st century business model, the number one pillar of that model is operating with integrity. And so I hear a lot today about how we can better work with each other and invest in each other, how we can expand into each other's companies. But I have to say, and I'd like to say, even though this is not top of mind for all of you, if we do not do this with integrity, if we don't invest in that, invest in values, into the fiber of our companies from the very beginning, we are going to not be able to change the dynamics of our governments, the dynamics, and by the way, nothing against our governments. It's just they need to talk to each other a bit better, and maybe we can help them communicate. But in the United States, we talk about creating systemic change in corporate America. I think it's in global. I like global, Poulet. I like the word global. I'm going to use that wherever you are.
No, he's in the back.
There. I like a lot of what you said because it was really spot on. But I think right now we're looking at the dynamics. And yes, we are looking to gain traction, and we are definitely looking at the emerging markets. I think that Africa is a fascinating market. I just spent a month there. I've spent a lot of time in China. I've spent time in Wuhan. It's the third largest producer of automobiles. They're trying to reinvent themselves in a lot of ways. They're trying to maintain relevance by looking at the autonomous vehicle. I have not been to India. Shame on me. Okay, maybe I'll have an invitation. But
you have invested in India, though.
Yes, but I've invested in India. I have invested in India. I've been an angel investor for many years. It started, I'm going to tell you my age, not really, but you could figure it out. I was actually 3 years old when I did this, but in the 1980s, okay, I was investing in technology. I was one of the very early investors in the seed rounds of things like Oracle and Microsoft and Applied Materials when everybody thought a semiconductor chip was a chocolate chip. I can remember going to a dining room at dinner, and they said to me, oh, there's that woman, you know, she's like invested all of her money in chocolate chips. I thought to myself, no, those are semiconductor chips, but we'll move on that. But I have seen the evolution of technology, and gaining that historical perspective of where we've been and where we are now, and what are truly our transformational technologies versus what I call our foundational technologies. Blockchain will be one of our foundational technologies because it actually reaches every single part of society. It will change. Similarly to what the wheel did, electricity did, that in a sense is a foundational technology. Where and how long it's going to take longer than everybody is thinking it's going to take. So I'm not jumping on that train right now. But given that historical perspective has enabled me to see now where these emerging markets are, where the growth opportunity is, where the talent is. I think that what Puli was saying, that they're giving these tests to kids who have never even gone to school, and they're seeing such a high IQ. I think we have underestimated our talent pool in every single country. And I think that everybody is so scared of AI. Oh my God, we're all so worried that AI somehow is going to replace human beings. Well, take a breath, everyone. AI is not going to replace human beings. What it is going to do, however, it is going to push us to use our talent of our people better. It is going to push us to upskill and reskill our talent, reskill our people, so that those monotonous tasks can be done by a machine. But let's now re-educate, and why don't we elevate the people rather than marginalize them? So now I've had a whole diatribe, and I have no idea what you asked me, but I'm hoping that I answered it.
Well, I was talking about your ethos. I think you at least gave your personal ethos in this. So obviously kind of about collective consciousness and conscious investments and all that. Is totally up my alley as well. But let's kind of tie it back now to looking east and the theme.
Yeah.
So the previous panel, we talked a lot about what was happening in those respective markets. Let's take it back to Silicon Valley. And obviously you've been kind of in the ecosystem for a little bit of time.
Too long.
Would love to hear your perspective on how you've seen the evolution, specifically with regards to China in Silicon Valley. Because just before you start, I mean, when I was digging up the numbers, I was surprised to see Alibaba open their first office in Silicon Valley in 2000, almost 20 years ago. They now have 350 employees in Silicon Valley. Baidu opened their office in 2011, 200 employees. Didi, 100 employees. All have their offices on the 101. And then you have like ByteDance and Tencent, who are right next to Stanford strategically. So would love to hear a bit more of what you have to say on the company side and the investor side both.
Yeah. So 5 years ago, when you said China was going to invest in your fund, literally my portfolio said, no way. All my founders said, I'm sorry, you can't have Chinese money in your fund. We are terrified. There's no way. They're going to get insight into what we're doing. They're going to steal it. They're going to copy it, and that is that. All right? And there was merit to that in some ways, and even China will say that there was. But right now, and I think that we had a bit of the representation here on this, China is ahead of the curve. China does not see themselves as copying anyone. China sees themselves as actually really kind of accelerating out in front, whether it be in quantum computing or AI or a number of the other sectors. So I think that the Silicon Valley is now actually looking at China and saying, what are you guys doing in China that we can copy here rather than the reverse? And so I think that there's a whole different mindset around China. Are we still worried? But I think it's actually I think it's wrong to worry about China. I think we have to partner up. And certainly, I always feel that you're actually supposed to make friends with your competition. You're not supposed to run away from it. So that's my philosophy about China is that they're also right now more reticent on investing into the Silicon Valley than they ever have been.
But yet you feel they still have to go to Silicon Valley to be closer, like from a talent perspective.
Yes,
basically.
Absolutely. And there's still best practices learned. I mean, yes, China is definitely on the forefront of innovation. They are now saying rather than made in China, they're saying innovated in China. They're saying created in China. And that's really wonderful. And so be it. It is. But they are looking at best practices, and they're looking at how we're rolling out our products and what mistakes we're making. And I think that's very, very wise.
And so on the LP kind of front, so you mentioned how back in the day, kind of your portfolio companies like keep the Chinese away.
Yeah.
Now, like, is that changing? Because presumably a lot of your portfolio companies will want to expand to China or be bought over by a Chinese company. So are they looking for kind of strategic plays already?
It's really interesting. As I said, I'm raising a growth fund right now, and one of the reasons I'm trying to get global investors, right? And I have not yet talked to a Chinese fund, and I haven't talked to a Chinese investor. And it's unfortunate, part of it is because of the dynamics between our governments right now. Mm-hmm. It is creating a lot of strife and distrust. And so I'm not quite sure if China would actually want to invest in my fund now, where
yes, Tamer wants to interrupt and ask you a question.
Can you answer the same question about GCC investors after this?
Yes.
Okay. But keep on
Maybe.
If you stop interrupting the ladies, Tamer.
Yes. So as far as China is concerned, we will see. As I said, I was at the Wuhan Economic and Development Zone. I'm actually on the Digital Health Board at Stanford, and I'm a Dean's Fellow at the medical school. So I do a lot of investing into digital health, and I look at, as I said, I really would prefer to heal other countries with other countries rather than harm them. I'm really looking how we can take some of our companies and expand them and learn and bring some other ones into the US, especially in terms of healthcare, as we're all dealing with aging population. In terms of China, when I was in Wuhan, it was fantastic, and there were 4 of my companies that they wanted to bring into Wuhan. But at the time, everybody flipped out from all the founders said, we're not going to go in there unless we have a partner, unless we have like a DuPont who wanted to bring us in. That was okay because there's the trust there. So we had to have a US company bring us into China. I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think that's the case. And I see a lot more transparency in China than I ever have. Now, let's jump to India, and I'll get to GCC in a second. But in India, you have 2 different barriers that I've worked with. One is obviously the languages. That's very difficult. But the other one is regulatory issues in terms of protectionism. I truly believe that the protectionism in China is very apparent, very transparent. Whereas with India, I'm not so sure exactly where it all falls. And what was noted before is that also India's government is very fluid, and it changes from day to day. And so it's very hard to land a center. And so I think that's one of my problems too. But on the other hand, I think India's talent is phenomenal. And I obviously have 1.3 billion active, potential participants, and any one of your companies, consumers or not, there's a virality there. And so I'm looking at India as how can I invest in India knowing that it might be very long term and just stay in India. Because when you invest in India, you're not investing in 4 or 5 other countries. When you're investing in, let's say, China, you are.
Okay.
So that's the way Silicon Valley, and I cannot represent all of Silicon Valley, right? But that's my opinion.
Do you have any Indian LPs?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And do you want to get to Tamer's question then about, I guess Tamer's question, I'm assuming, knowing what's in his head, is that he's probably asking you this because he wants to know whether there's kind of a stigma associated with certain LPs coming from certain markets, for example, whether it be GCC, India, Russia, China, any of these basically.
Well, it's interesting. I had 4 Russian investors come to me. They heard me speak at a conference, and they said, "Ooh, you're raising a growth fund," which is, these are the lowest risk of the funds, right? Highest performers. And they said, "We'd like to talk to you about putting this in and putting this in and putting this in." The thing is that none of my companies want to expand into Russia, but a lot of my companies want to expand into the ME. And so this is where I'm looking. Once again, I'm really not looking for just the money. I'm looking at where my companies want to expand and where I want to potentially bring companies into the US. I think there is some distrust because of the political environment. I have some LPs in my fund right now who are saying, you're not going to take this money, or you're not going to take this money. But once again, our governments, and I'll speak for myself, I'm born in England, I'm sort of 1 foot in each. So I can talk about both the bad behavior of both England and the US. But we have made some tremendous mistakes, our governments have. That does not mean that the people have. It just means that our governments have. And for us to blame our governments and for us to somehow carve out
The whole population?
correct. I think that's doing everybody a disservice. I think right now we have to use businesses to create diplomacy. I always say that we have to create bridges of trust. We need to do that with businesses. And so I'm not going to just cut out populations just because there might have been bad behavior. Otherwise, you all can cut out the United States and do that every day. So do not worry about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, related to that then, so, I mean, one common criticism that we tend to hear a lot here is, why are the kind of US VCs not investing in the Middle East?
Yeah. Okay, well,
or not enough?
Okay, so a couple of years ago, I wasn't investing in the Middle East because I didn't see the tech talent here. That was actually the reason. Because I had a lot of big companies coming to me and pitching these ideas, and they were very, very smart ideas, but they just didn't have, they had the visionary and they had maybe an operations mind and execution, but they didn't have the CTOs, they didn't have the tech talent, and there is a vacuum here, okay? But the dynamics has changed, and I'll tell you why. Probably about 30% of our companies, right, had their dev teams outside the United States. They have it in Latin America, they have it in Portugal, they have it in Africa, they have it all over the world. And so now to get tech talent, you don't have to have it here. You can actually export it, outsource it, it's more economical, and that's okay. Now, you do need a CTO. When we do look at a company, we never invest without having a tech mind, right? It has to have a CTO as well as, we say, in operations as well as a tech. So that we do need, and I think that there still is a bit of a vacuum here on that. But I also heard some pitches this morning.
There were 4 Emirati pitches this morning as part of the Iftikhari program.
And here's the really interesting part. For the most, there were interesting models, right, that definitely had some merit, but they were focusing on the wrong part of the product. And so on one hand, we had a bus company, and they were solving the dangers in school buses with parents and being able to track their children, when they should have been really focused on a logistics platform for the transportation and being able to value the data behind that. And so then you had, there were so many, you had a plastic or beauty platform. And I said to her, that's wonderful, but the fact is that if someone's going to find their doctor, right, or find someone to do any type of beautification, that they're going to have to build trust, and we established that. But you can't establish trust just by going to the health ministry. I said to her afterwards, why don't you create a community? Because women, so I'm a mother of 6, okay? So the number one place that I get information and healthcare information is never from my pediatrician, but it's from another mother, right? Yeah. We saw that when the creation of Baby Center, when Tina Sharkey built that after Johnson & Johnson, she built Baby Center in the United States. It was a mother-to-mother network. I think that if you're going to do a beauty platform, you're going to want to hear it from other women. And that's going to actually create that virality and also that trust, not from getting a certification. And so there are different, almost I could sit with each one of these companies and be able to hear their pitches and zoom in on what's necessary, right? And I think that maybe a little more education in the Silicon Valley way, which is, and not to say that Africa is not right, and not to say that China is not right, but I'm saying that there might be some very small tweaks that we can all provide, all of us, the different communities, to the ME to give you guys a little bit more of a boost and kind of readjust your focus.
No, I think it was very useful. I mean, Hannah can correct me if I'm wrong, but to have, so basically all the speakers who you saw today, were acting as judges for the 4 companies. So I thought it was really interesting, actually, because I was watching from the back, to listen, actually, from Jillian's perspective and Poulet's perspective and Vani's perspective, and everyone was kind of chiming in. It's very rare, actually, to have all these different geographic perspectives kind of put in one room, trying to support and give feedback to local companies. You guys should do more of this, by the way.
It was really also interesting for me because I had all the panelists, all the speakers. I learned so much from all of you today. And that's one of the reasons I like sitting on panels, because I have my own perspective, and that's maybe the Silicon Valley perspective or whatever, but I learned from everyone else. I cannot assess a company properly unless I have a partner here on the ground. Okay, that's one of my biggest barriers of entering this market. Unless I have a co-investor, so to speak, unless I have someone to trust who'd be able to assess. There was a person from Make My Trip, the gentleman, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Anshuman.
Oh yes, sorry, wherever you are, if you're still here. He gave a perspective and to this one of the women who was my local. She was, and he was taking it from the travel industry, but he also understood the culture and the fact that people need more meetups, that expats need places, right, more to socialize. I would have not known that. See, I would have not known that. So about 80% of the companies that I invest in are actually in the US. One, because I know the culture, but 2, also I spend 90% of my time in the offices of the companies with the founders, finding talent, creating strategic growth plans, working on the product, creating branding and messaging.
That's part of your special sauce at Structure, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
at StructureCapital, they actually do a lot of portfolio support with their portfolio companies.
Huge,
right?
Huge. We do Brand Camp, which is a 48-hour hackathon. We put our companies through. So I've built 4 companies. I blew up one of them. It was a total failure, redefined the failure. But 3 of them I sold. One was a brand communication company. So our philosophy is if you can't say it, you can't sell it, right? So if you can't message your company from the very beginning, be able to distill it down to its essence, you're going to have a problem. And instead of working on your brand narrative, let's say in your B round, why don't you work on it in your seed round and be able to convey the values of your company? And so we put our companies through something called a 40-hour brand camp hackathon. And it drives them to their brand identity, brand point of view, mission manifestos, logo redesigns, and so on and so forth. And so my philosophy is you bake in the brand at the same time you develop the product. So it's at the very beginning, not later. You have to say it and sell it at the very beginning. So that's one. And then we've also partnered up with a consulting firm called A.T. Kearney, which is one of the largest. And we've created something called Ops Camp. So we drill down to one specific problem, whether it is rolling out global call centers or a sales team or whatever that problem, that task is at hand. And so we work with their partners and us to create more eyes and more expertise and more data that they have collected over years to provide our companies.
Interesting.
In the swap on that is that they get to know what we're doing, what our technologies, what our companies are doing to support their bigger clients.
Okay.
So whether it be Safeway or Sephora or Johnson & Johnson, whatever that is, now we have solutions, our companies have solutions potentially for their clients.
Okay, interesting. So we're going to end, unless people have questions, but one last question, because I think it's important to talk as the last panel about, we've had all this like kind of, information thrown at us throughout the afternoon, but like, where are we heading now, right? So like, I'd be curious to hear your thought on whether you see kind of all these foreign markets that we've talked about as the kind of neo-colonial battleground now between maybe the US and China, or US and India. I mean, is that like, are we going towards an Amazon versus Alibaba, Uber versus Didi? Are we going to see more of this now coming on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think we're not in the thick of it. I think we're actually just wading out into this water. It is going to be
fun.
It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be like intergalactical wars. But actually, I'm hoping that I love what China is doing. I think that the interconnectivity that you've put forward is really is special. I love what Africa is doing. I think they're reaching out, and I think they're also educating the world a little bit more on what can be, what is possible. I spent some time in Africa, and I came out of there thinking that, I kept thinking everything is possible here. And I really love India. I have not been, but I love the values. I love the harmony. I love the talent pool that comes out of India, a lot of it who are in many of our companies. And I look forward to understanding and being able to work and partner up with the ME more, because there is tremendous leadership and value here that is yet to be realized. So I am really looking forward to it. And by fact that you have put this all together, and you've assembled such great minds and such reimagination of what can be, I think that's really shows tremendous leadership. So I don't think anybody is going to circumvent the GCC. I think it's going to be right in the sweet spot. So I'm looking forward to seeing what is going to happen here.
Well, as they say here, ahlan wa sahlan. So
I was going to say that too.
Feel free to come. And hopefully you'll go over and visit Vani in Bangalore as well.
I will. I look forward to that. I really appreciated your insight. Okay. I'm on a learning curve. I always tell my children, evolve every day, because if you do not, shame on you. So I'm ever evolving.
We're all ever evolving.
Yes,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right. Wait, don't turn me off yet. Okay. So we're going to take a little break. Thank you, Jillian, for sharing your conscious approach. So we have 2 workshops and some roundups coming up. So I think there's a break happening right now, right? For what, 10? According to Robin, 10 minutes. So we're going to have one workshop that's going to be led by Latham and Watkins, who are sponsoring, which is going to be a really fun kind of role play type workshop. That's taking place in this room. And then we have another workshop that's led by ADGM, that's going to also talk about kind of the latest developments for kind of support for the investors and the entrepreneur community in the UAE. So you can start over there, stay here, kind of switch around. And then we're also going to have a couple of companies, 5 companies pitch. So you should also check those out. Jillian and Vani are actually going to be acting as judges, or feedback judges, I guess, for the companies as well. So if you want to get a feel, especially for the investors in the room, for how Vani and Jillian think and the types of questions that they ask some of the entrepreneurs, this is a great way of kind of experiencing a live Shark Tank.
It's all happening in Cadillac?
Yeah, so the roundups are happening in AD, it's called Start AD Central, which is right across. If you can't find it.
Same building across the hall.
Yeah, same building, but just across the hall. So you can ask one of us and we can redirect you, and then you can have your Shark Tank experience. And then here we'll have the legal workshop in 10 minutes, right? Thank you, everyone. Go grab some coffee.